In 1953, the US government launched a classified program so shocking that even today, most Americans have never heard of it. Under the innocent-sounding name Project Sunshine, federal agencies began secretly harvesting the bodies of dead babies and children from around the world. Their mission wasn't medical research or public health. It was to study how radioactive fallout from nuclear weapons was contaminating the human race, one dead child at a time. For decades, this program operated in complete secrecy. Parents never knew their children's bodies had been taken. Governments around the world participated without public knowledge. The evidence was classified, buried, and forgotten. Until now. This is the story of how America's atomic scientists turned human tragedy into scientific data, how they built a global network of body snatchers, and how they measured the nuclear contamination of our species, all while keeping the public in the dark about both the program and the dangers it was designed to study. Hit the notification bell right now so you don't miss any of our unsealed histories. Project Sunshine emerged from the terrifying realization that nuclear weapons were changing life on Earth in ways no one had anticipated. By 1953, the United States had detonated dozens of atomic and hydrogen bombs in the atmosphere. The radioactive fallout from these tests was circling the globe, settling into soil, water, and food supplies worldwide. But how much radiation were humans actually absorbing? How dangerous was this contamination? The only way to find out was to study human tissue itself, and that required bodies. The program was born from a classified Rand Corporation report dated August 6, 1953, titled Worldwide Effects of Atomic Weapons, Project Sunshine. This document, prepared for the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and U.S. Air Force, laid out a chilling scientific agenda: systematic collection and analysis of human remains to measure radioactive contamination. The report's authors included some of America's most distinguished scientists, led by Nobel laureate Willard F. Libby of the University of Chicago. What they created wasn't just a research program. It was a global infrastructure for studying the nuclear contamination of humanity itself. At the heart of Project Sunshine was a single radioactive isotope, strontium-90. This byproduct of nuclear fission was identified as the most dangerous radioactive product from atomic weapons. The properties of strontium-90 made it uniquely terrifying. Each nuclear detonation produced substantial quantities, 1 gram per kiloton of yield energy. With a 20-year half-life, it would remain dangerous for decades. Most alarmingly, strontium-90 was a bone-seeking element that would concentrate in human skeletons, particularly in growing children. Project Sunshine scientists calculated that strontium-90 possessed a high carcinogenic capability and that a given amount above threshold, which may be 0, fixed in the bone, will cause a certain average percentage of the population to die of bone cancer, comparable with that observed in victims of radium poisoning. The document revealed the government's cold scientific assessment. Young and growing tissue is most susceptible to radiation damage. Bone formation in an individual is complete by the time he is 20 years of age. This meant children were the most vulnerable and the most valuable for study. If you're starting to understand the scope of this program, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to wake more people up. Project Sunshine required a worldwide collection network, operating in complete secrecy. The classified documents reveal the systematic approach. For our model, we will also require an analysis of the ordinary strontium content of soils, waters, and biological materials. But the most valuable samples would be human tissue itself. The program outlined collection sites across 6 global regions: northern Utah, southwestern Idaho, Kansas, Iowa, New England, South America, England, and Japan. Each area was chosen for specific strategic reasons: proximity to nuclear test sites, agricultural importance, or availability of human specimens. The human tissue requirements were detailed and systematic. Bone samples from 3 age groups: 0–10 years, 10–20 years, over 20 years, teeth, and other specimens. The document specified that areas should be fairly large metropolitan areas to ensure availability of sufficient quantities of human specimens and the presence of large hospitals with adequate staffs who can properly collect and segregate the specimens desired. The program planners understood they needed institutional cooperation. The collection of samples will undoubtedly be expedited and the quality of sampling much improved if an individual associated with the study travels to the foreign place to supervise the sample collection. Project Sunshine's architects wrapped their body-snatching program in scientific necessity. The classified report calculated that nuclear testing had already released several kilograms of SAR-90 within less than a decade, and that this contamination had probably disseminated enough of the contaminant to provide amounts that are probably now detectable in samples of inert and biological materials throughout the world. The scientists argued they were conducting a radioactive tracer chemistry experiment on a worldwide scale. They noted with disturbing matter-of-factness, "It is rather striking that the last comprehensive measurements of soils for natural strontium were made in 1914 to 1917. The strontium cycle in the biosphere is almost completely unknown." The program's scope was staggering. Scientists plan to analyze 216 samples worldwide, including human specimens, animal bones, food sources, soil, and water. Each sample would be analyzed for both radioactive strontium-90 and natural strontium to determine contamination levels. Comment: Sunshine, if you're realizing how this innocent name masked a horrifying program. The Project Sunshine documents reveal the terrifying science behind strontium-90 contamination. The radioactive isotope follows the same metabolic pathway as calcium, meaning the body cannot distinguish between the natural and the radioactive isotopes of an element. This deception at the cellular level made strontium-90 particularly dangerous. As the classified report explained, the bones of an individual who grows up in an environment of a maintained, given ratio of SAR-90 to natural strontium will contain SAR-90 and natural strontium in the same ratio. The contamination process was insidious and generational. Charts in the documents show calcium and strontium accumulation throughout childhood, with the highest daily intake occurring during peak growth years. Children born after nuclear testing began would carry this radioactive burden throughout their lives. The scientists calculated maximum permissible concentrations based on industrial standards for radiation workers, 1 microcurie of strontium-90 in the human body. But they acknowledged this standard might be inadequate for large populations, particularly children. It may be necessary to reduce the MPC values for large populations. Project Sunshine scientists performed calculations that revealed the global scale of nuclear contamination. Their preliminary estimate showed that larger than 2.5 x 106 megatons of nuclear explosions would be required to bring the world's population to maximum permissible strontium-90 levels. While this seemed like a large number, the scientists noted ominously, now, with the advent of high-yield bombs, and because of the world's increasing stockpile, the margin over the early estimates is still large, but is less clearly definable. The documents reveal that contamination was already occurring. Fallout measurements from nuclear tests showed radioactive material spreading globally, with concentrations varying by factors of 200 between different locations. The program's architects noted, Because of this possible extreme variation of SUI-90 deposition, localized, long-range, Senior-90 contamination may well be the most important aspect of the Sunshine Project. Project Sunshine essentially turned the entire human race into unwitting experimental subjects. The classified documents explicitly state this. Today, we are afforded the opportunity of doing a radioactive tracer chemistry experiment on a worldwide scale. The program required detailed study of human metabolism and contamination patterns. Scientists planned to correlate strontium-90 levels in human bone with environmental contamination, dietary sources, and individual characteristics. They developed mathematical models to track how radioactive fallout moved from soil to plants to food to human bodies. The experimental design treated human subjects as data points in a massive contamination study. Bone samples would be randomly sorted and analyzed for radioactive content. The scientists planned to have complete case histories of the various people in the pooled samples to understand contamination patterns. Most disturbing was the program's focus on children. The documents repeatedly emphasized that young and growing tissue is most susceptible to radiation damage, and that the critical exposure period was from the age of 0 to 20 years. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We're about to reveal how Project Sunshine operated in complete secrecy while studying the nuclear contamination of humanity. Project Sunshine operated through a sophisticated network designed to maintain absolute secrecy. The Rand Corporation report was classified top secret and distributed only to the highest levels of government and military leadership. The program's funding flowed through multiple channels to obscure its true nature. The Atomic Energy Commission provided contract at 11-1-135, while the U.S. Air Force contributed through Project Rand contract AF 33-038 6413. This dual funding structure helped hide the program's scope and budget. International cooperation was essential, but conducted in secret. The documents reveal plans for an individual associated with the study to travel to the foreign place to supervise the sample collection. This suggests a network of scientists and officials coordinating the global body collection program without public knowledge. The program utilized existing medical and research institutions as cover. By working through hospitals, universities, and research centers, Project Sunshine could collect human specimens without raising suspicions about a secret government program. The classified documents detail sophisticated methods for analyzing human tissue contamination. Scientists developed specialized techniques for separating and measuring minute amounts of strontium-90 in human bones. The process began with complete dissolution of bone samples using hydrofluoric acid to ensure no radioactive particles escaped detection. The strontium was then chemically separated and purified through multiple precipitation steps. The key innovation was using strontium-90's radioactive daughter product, yttrium-90, for detection. This technique, called yttrium milking, allowed scientists to concentrate radioactivity from large bone samples into tiny, measurable amounts. Specialized counting equipment could detect incredibly small amounts of contamination, as little as 5 disintegrations per minute in human tissue. This sensitivity meant the program could track contamination levels far below what would cause immediate health effects. Perhaps most cynically, Project Sunshine documents included plans for prophylactic control of strontium-90 contamination through dietary manipulation. Scientists suggested that adding non-radioactive strontium to soil or food would dilute the SAR-90 that people absorbed. They also recommended increasing calcium intake, noting that individuals who tend to accumulate high amounts of normal strontium are more susceptible to the action of the contaminant because they accumulate strontium in lieu of the calcium, which is deficient in their diet. These proposals reveal the government's awareness that contamination was occurring and could be mitigated. However, there is no evidence that such protective measures were ever implemented, or that the public was warned about the contamination their own government was studying. The documents conclude optimistically. Control of contaminants, be they infective or radiological, does not appear to be beyond the capability of man. Yet this control was reserved for those who knew the secret, not the contaminated populations being studied. Project Sunshine revealed a disturbing finding about long-term atmospheric contamination. The documents note that much of the radioactive material from high-yield nuclear tests was suspended in the upper atmosphere for long periods of time. This atmospheric storage meant contamination would continue falling to Earth for years after testing stopped. Scientists compared this to the volcanic dust from Krakatoa, which stayed suspended in the atmosphere for 2 or 3 years, but noted that atomic bomb particles were likely smaller and might remain airborne even longer. The implication was chilling. Even if nuclear testing ended immediately, radioactive contamination would continue accumulating in human bodies for decades. The atmosphere itself had become a reservoir of contamination, slowly releasing its deadly cargo onto an unsuspecting world. Project Sunshine documents reveal systematic problems with fallout measurements that suggested the contamination was far worse than publicly acknowledged. Analysis of fallout data from nuclear tests showed that 80% or more of the tumbler, snapper, activity remained suspended in the atmosphere for periods after June 18, 1952. The measurement systems were inadequate for detecting the true scale of contamination. Scientists noted that gummed paper may not retain 100% of the activity falling onto it, and estimated collection efficiency could be as low as 10 to 15%. Even more concerning, large quantities of activity fell in areas not adequately covered by the sampling network. The classified documents acknowledge that there is not much structure in the problem to be taken advantage of now, because we know very little about the processes we are studying. This admission reveals that Project Sunshine was studying contamination processes that were poorly understood, using measurement techniques that were inadequate, while the public remained completely unaware of the scope of their exposure. Drop your thoughts below. Were you aware that the US government secretly studied nuclear contamination by harvesting dead children's bodies for decades? Project Sunshine required international cooperation to track global contamination patterns. The documents detail collection sites spanning continents, from Japan to England to South America. This geographic distribution was essential because different cities have different food supply areas, and contamination varied dramatically by location. The program's international scope raises disturbing questions about government cooperation in secret human experimentation. How many foreign officials knew about the body collection program? How many hospitals and medical institutions participated without informing families? The classified nature of Project Sunshine meant that even participating scientists may not have understood the full scope of the program. The documents suggest compartmentalization of information, with different researchers focusing on specific aspects: atmospheric transport, soil contamination, biological uptake, or human analysis. Project Sunshine specifically targeted the most vulnerable populations, children and infants whose growing bones would show the highest concentrations of strontium-90. The program required pooled samples from different age groups, meaning multiple children's remains were combined for analysis. The selection criteria were coldly scientific. Areas with large hospitals, with adequate staffs who can properly collect and segregate the specimens desired. This suggests the program relied on medical professionals who either knew about the secret collection or were deceived about its purpose. Parents never consented to their children becoming part of a secret government study. Families grieving the loss of a child had no idea that their baby's bones were being analyzed to measure nuclear contamination. The violation of trust was absolute and systematic. Project Sunshine operated for decades while maintaining complete secrecy about both the program itself and the contamination it was studying. The classified documents were not declassified until the 1990s, nearly 40 years after the program began. During those decades, the government continued nuclear testing, while knowing that each explosion added to global human contamination. The secrecy served a dual purpose: hiding the body collection program and concealing evidence of widespread radioactive poisoning of the population. The program's legacy raises fundamental questions about informed consent, government transparency, and scientific ethics. How many other secret programs studied human populations without their knowledge? What other contamination or health risks remain classified? Project Sunshine's techniques and findings laid the groundwork for modern environmental and health monitoring. The program developed methods for tracking contaminants through food chains, measuring human exposure to environmental toxins, and assessing population health risks. However, the program also established precedents for secret human experimentation and population surveillance. The infrastructure created for Project Sunshine, international scientific cooperation, institutional cover, classified funding, and compartmentalized research, could easily be adapted for other purposes. The program demonstrates how national security justifications can be used to override ethical constraints on human research. The scientists involved convinced themselves they were protecting humanity by studying contamination, even while concealing both the study and its disturbing findings from the very people they claimed to protect. This is unsealed proof, not paranoia. The documents are declassified. The evidence is overwhelming. The government's own records confirm every detail. Project Sunshine turned the nuclear contamination of humanity into a secret research project. Dead children became data points in classified studies of radioactive fallout. Parents never knew their babies' bodies were harvested to measure the atomic age's poisoning of our species. The program operated for decades under the innocent name Project Sunshine, because government scientists believed radioactive fallout was as natural and inevitable as sunshine itself. Now you know the truth about the government's secret body-snatching program and the nuclear contamination it was designed to study. What will you do with this knowledge?